My friends, the Philadelphia Eagles made a bold and calculated move on draft night, and if you've been following closely, you already know this wasn't just another routine first-round decision, it was a statement. The organization, led by Howie Roseman, identified a specific scenario ahead of time. If wide receiver My Lemon started to slide, they would be ready to act, and that's exactly what happened. As the board began to fall into place, the Eagles saw their opportunity. Lemon, who was graded as a top 15 player internally, was still available at pick 20. Without hesitation, Philadelphia struck a deal with the Dallas Cowboys, moving up from pick 23 to secure their guy. The cost? 2 fourth-round picks, 114 and 137, while also receiving a 7th rounder in return. When you look at the value, it's not an overpay. It's a targeted investment in a player they clearly believe can impact this offense immediately. And here's where things get even more interesting. According to reports from Ian Rappaport, the Pittsburgh Steelers were on the verge of selecting My Lemon at pick 21. Lemon was literally on the phone with them when Roseman called and told him, "We're going to take you." That's not just timing, that's aggressive front office execution. Now, I know the fan base is split on this move. Some love it, others are questioning whether wide receiver was the right priority. But when you really break down who My Lemon is as a player, you start to understand why the Eagles were so high on him. This is a wide receiver who brings toughness, physicality, and edge. He's not afraid of contact. In fact, he seeks it. He blocks, he fights for extra yards, and he plays with an attitude that fits Philadelphia perfectly. From a skill standpoint, Lemon checks a lot of boxes. His hands are elite. His route running is sharp, creative, and deceptive. He has a natural feel for finding soft spots in zone coverage, which is critical when you consider how defenses across the NFL are evolving. More teams are leaning into zone schemes to limit explosive plays, and Lemon thrives in exactly those situations. He's coming off a massive college season, winning the Biletnikoff Award in 2025 as the best wide receiver in the nation, along with first-team All-American honors. That's not hype, that's production at the highest level. Now let's connect this to the bigger picture. One of the clear offensive struggles for the Eagles last season was attacking zone defenses, especially over the middle of the field. That's also been an area where Jalen Hurts has had inconsistent moments. Timing, anticipation, and layering throws between defenders. By bringing in Lemon, the Eagles are giving Hurts a reliable option in those critical areas. A safety valve. A playmaker who can turn short gains into big ones. And when you look at the wide receiver room now, it's starting to take on a new identity. DeVonta Smith brings elite route running and finesse. Lemon adds toughness and versatility. There's a mix of skill sets developing here, especially with the franchise potentially preparing for a future transition at the position. It's also worth noting this isn't the first time the Eagles have made a bold draft day move with Dallas. Back in 2021, they traded up to draft DeVonta Smith, and that worked out pretty well. Since the miss on Jalen Reagor, Roseman has been on a strong run with first-round selections, and this move suggests that confidence is still there. Still, it's not a perfect decision. There's a legitimate argument that offensive tackle might have been the more valuable long-term pick, especially with players like Max Hanner going shortly after to Pittsburgh. But the Eagles clearly felt that wide receiver was a pressing need, and they addressed it with conviction. So now it turns to you, the fans. You've seen the move, you understand the reasoning, and you know what this team is trying to build moving forward. Do you believe trading up for My Lemon was the right call for this offense? Or would you have gone in a different direction? And when you start looking ahead to day 2, that's where this entire strategy really begins to unfold. Because the Eagles didn't just make a move for today, they positioned themselves for what comes next. With picks at 54, 68, and 98, this front office still has multiple opportunities to shape the roster in a meaningful way, and based on how the board is falling, there's a very clear direction they could take. The biggest thing to understand right now is flexibility. By only giving up mid-round capital to move up for My Lemon, Howie Roseman preserved enough assets to stay aggressive if needed. If there's a player they love starting to slip again in the second round, don't be surprised if Philadelphia makes another move. This is a front office that plans scenarios ahead of time, and what we saw in round 1 is proof of that. Now, let's talk about the real needs. Even after adding Lemon, this roster still has some clear areas that need attention. Safety stands out immediately. It's not just a depth concern, it's a potential impact position that hasn't been fully solidified. There are still some intriguing names available, players who bring physicality, range, and playmaking ability. If the Eagles want someone who can come downhill, hit, and create turnovers, that position could very well well be addressed early on day 2. Then you look at the defensive front. Edge rusher remains a priority, and it's hard to imagine this team leaving the draft without adding at least one player to that group. The Eagles have always valued pressure up front, and there are still several prospects on the board who fit their mold. Explosive, athletic, and capable of rotating into the system right away. That defensive identity isn't going to change. The offensive line is another storyline that quietly carries a lot of weight. There's been a run on offensive tackles already, and that naturally thins out the depth. Still, guard could be a sneaky option here, especially considering contract situations and long-term planning. Building in the trenches has always been a foundational philosophy for this organization, and just because they went wide receiver in round 1 doesn't mean they've moved away from that. Tight end is also something to keep an eye on. It might not be the flashiest pick, but there's value there depending on how the board falls. If the Eagles see someone who can contribute both as a receiver and a blocker, that could add another layer to the offense, especially with how they like to mix personnel packages. What's interesting is what they probably won't do. Quarterback and running back don't feel like priorities right now. This is more about filling key gaps and building depth at premium positions. The structure of this roster suggests they're trying to stay competitive immediately while also planning for the future, and that balance is not easy to execute, but so far they're sticking to their blueprint. And let's not overlook something else: the psychological impact of that first round move. When you go up and get your guy, you send a message not just to your locker room, but to the rest of the league. The Philadelphia Eagles are not sitting back and reacting, they're dictating. That kind of approach can carry momentum into the rest of the draft. At the same time, expectations rise. My Lemon is not walking into a neutral situation. He's stepping into a fan base that demands results and a team that believes it can compete at a high level. How quickly he adapts, how he connects with Jalen Hurts, and how this offense evolves will all be under the spotlight from day 1. So now everything shifts to execution. The board is still rich with talent, the Eagles still have capital, and the front office has already shown it's willing to be aggressive. The question isn't just who they'll take next, it's how bold they're willing to be to complete this draft class. The next phase of this draft is where things can truly separate a good class from a great one, and if you're paying close attention to how the board is shaping up, there's a real opportunity here for the Philadelphia Eagles to come away with multiple impact players without needing to reach. At pick 54, everything starts to tighten up. This is typically the range where teams begin targeting players they had late first-round grades on, and if even one of those prospects slips, that's where Howie Roseman becomes dangerous. He's already shown he's willing to move when the value matches the board, and there's no reason to believe he won't do it again. The Eagles are sitting in a position where patience and aggression can both work in their favor. It just depends on how the names fall. Let's say a top-tier safety is still available at 54. That instantly fills one of the biggest needs on this roster with a player who can contribute right away. You're talking about someone who can impact the game in multiple ways: coverage, run support, and creating turnovers. That kind of addition changes the dynamic of the defense almost immediately. But if that run happens earlier and the board shifts, don't rule out the trenches. There's still value at guard and along the defensive line, and those are positions where Philadelphia has consistently built its identity. Adding depth there isn't just about this season, it's about sustaining success over multiple years. And if we've learned anything from this organization, it's that they rarely ignore long-term planning. Now, when you move to picks 68 and 98, this is where things get really interesting. These are the selections that allow you to take calculated swings. Players with high upside who might need some development but can turn into major contributors. It's also where roster depth is built, and depth is what carries teams through a full NFL season. Edge rusher continues to stand out as a likely addition somewhere in this range. The Eagles value rotation, they value fresh legs, and they value pressure. Even if the top names are gone, there are still players available who fit their system: athletic, explosive, and capable of developing into something more over time. And then there's the possibility of a surprise. Every draft has one. A player that wasn't heavily linked to the team suddenly becomes the pick because the value is too good to pass up. That's another reason why having multiple selections in this range matters. You give yourself more chances to find that hidden gem. All of this ties back to the move for My Lemon. That decision wasn't made in isolation. It was part of a larger plan, a sequence of moves designed to reshape the roster with intention. If the Eagles can now follow that up by hitting on even 2 of these day 2 picks, you're suddenly looking at a draft class that could have a real impact on both sides of the ball. And don't forget the bigger picture here. The development of Jalen Hurts is still central to everything. The more weapons, protection, and balance you provide him, the more this offense can evolve. My Lemon helps in one area, especially against zone, but continuing to build around Hurts is clearly still part of the mission. At the same time, the defense can't be overlooked. In today's NFL, if you're not generating pressure and forcing mistakes, you're playing from behind. That's why these next picks matter so much. They're not just about adding talent, they're about maintaining a standard. So as we move forward, keep your eyes on how aggressive the Eagles decide to be. Will they sit and let the board come to them, or will they go up and get another player they believe in? Based on what we've already seen, you can't rule anything out, because here's the reality. What the Eagles do next doesn't just define this draft, it defines how quickly this team can reload and stay in contention. The foundation is already there, but the difference between being competitive and being dominant often comes down to how well you execute in these middle rounds. And if you go back to the way Howie Roseman approached round 1, there's a clear pattern: preparation, patience, and then precision. That same formula now applies to everything that follows. The front office mapped out multiple draft scenarios before this even started, and we're watching one of those plans play out in real time. Now imagine this for a second. You've already added My Lemon, a receiver who directly addresses one of your biggest offensive issues: beating zone coverage. You've given Jalen Hurts a new weapon who thrives in the middle of the field, who can create separation, absorb contact, and extend plays after the catch. That alone changes the geometry of the offense. But if you follow that up with, let's say, a physical safety who can anchor the back end of your defense, and then add an edge rusher who can rotate in and generate pressure, suddenly this draft starts to feel complete. Not flashy across the board, but efficient, targeted, and impactful. And that's really the word here: impact. The Eagles aren't just drafting for depth, they're drafting for roles. Every pick from this point forward has a purpose. Whether it's immediate contribution or long-term development, there's a vision attached to each decision. Another thing to keep in mind is how the rest of the league is reacting. When the Philadelphia Eagles moved up in front of the Pittsburgh Steelers to take Lemon, that sent a ripple through the draft. Teams now know Philadelphia is willing to jump them if they sit back too long. That kind of reputation can actually influence how other teams operate. It can force earlier selections, unexpected reaches, and ultimately create value elsewhere on the board. So there's a strategic layer to this that goes beyond just player evaluation. It's about controlling the flow of the draft, even without holding a top 10 pick. That's how experienced front offices find advantages. As the clock ticks toward the next selection, the big question isn't just who's the best player available, it's who fits what this team is trying to become. Because if you've been paying attention, there's a shift happening. The roster is being reshaped with versatility in mind, with players who can adapt, who can handle multiple roles, and who bring a certain edge to their game. And that edge matters in a city like Philadelphia. It's not just about talent, it's about mentality. My Lemon brings that. The next picks need to follow that same identity. So now we're at that point where everything is lined up. The board is still offering value, the Eagles still have capital, and the front office has already shown its hand. They're not afraid to go get what